Good evening. Everyone knows me, my name is Lucia. We'll begin a series. I made a point of dividing it up, and you might wonder, but the golden verses of Pythagoras, for those who are familiar, aren't that long. Why make it a series? There are 72 phrases to be discussed in a lecture, and that would take me about 3 hours to teach. For you, that would be extremely exhausting. So, in order for us to discuss and feel more comfortable, I divided it into 3 parts. Today, as you have in your outline, we'll see up to verse number 24. Of course, the goal is not to exhaust the subject, nor to talk about the life of Pythagoras, especially because, between us, we really don't know anything about Pythagoras' life. Everything is speculation. There are even those who say he never existed at all. Personally, I believe he did exist, but the historical evidence is extremely scarce. The school of Croton was burned down, and almost nothing remained. What survived is said to be a small manuscript with a few lines attributed to Pythagoras. Plato, in his time, said he paid a fortune for it. In fact, the golden verses themselves were written by one of his disciples who escaped the fire. So, we don't have much information about his biography. The biography of Pythagoras is mostly speculation, and sometimes it is ancient speculation. Some speculations date back to his own era, while others are more recent. So, we'll touch briefly on his biography and then discuss these first verses. My idea is this: I am a teacher of study techniques, among other things that I enjoy teaching, but especially study techniques. It's something I love to teach, because these are simple techniques that provide you with a wealth of possibilities to help you not forget things, which is truly remarkable. So I thought, how will I make sure people don't forget these golden verses of Pythagoras? I decided to create for you a guide where, on the side, you have a little memorization scheme using study techniques. In other words, you will see that this summary in topics, from 1 to 5, from 6 to 9, contains the main ideas found in those sections. This way, you can underline a word or two here, and you'll already know what it refers to. This first part consists of oaths. The second part is such, and so on, because this is a moral code. The golden verses of Pythagoras are a guide for you to live by in your daily life. How am I supposed to live it if I don't even remember what he said? So, if I have some general ideas, a few key points in mind, it obviously becomes much easier to recall them, as we'll see. What he does here is not theoretical at all. It is truly a moral code that he applied among his disciples, and it worked. Pythagoras' task, as it is said, was very difficult because he went to Egypt and studied there. Then he traveled through many places, Babylon, Persia, and it is said he even went to India. Then he returned to Greece. Greece was not the same as Egypt. The disciples were not as disciplined as the Egyptians. Nor did they have the same ease, dedication, or devotion that existed in Egypt. Egypt was a civilization deeply oriented toward the sacred. Greece was not as much. So, it was a challenge to get his disciples to assimilate his precepts. So, he created a moral code specifically for the people of that time. Well, say that we are closer to the Greeks than to the Egyptians, although, in truth, we are not really like either of them anymore. We have declined a lot. In our historical moment, from a technological perspective, we have advanced rapidly. But from a moral perspective, things are quite complicated. Even morality itself is questioned whether it is something valid or not. So, we are not even at the level of the Greeks. But, in any case, it is a plausible code for us to set as a goal. It's nothing out of this world. And what do I think? What I find most admirable, most beautiful in this code, in these golden verses, which are said to have truly been created by Pythagoras, but were copied by one of his disciples who escaped the fire, since Pythagoras died in the fire. I hadn't even told you that there was a fire, had I? I'll tell you now. He died in the fire at the school of Croton. In these verses, at a certain point, he comes and says, I swear to you that if you use this, it will work. I swear. Can you imagine a figure of Pythagoras' stature making an oath to a code? An oath from a man of such magnitude. This is something very serious. It's not something to be taken lightly. I swear, in the name of the sacred quaternary, he makes a formal oath, saying, if you do it, it will work. That carries weight. The first time I read this, I thought, wait a minute, Pythagoras making an oath, he's not joking. He is not a man for whom an oath is an empty word. He did not waste words. In other words, this is a code sworn by a philosopher of Pythagoras' stature, who, by the way, is said to have been the one who created the word philosophy, the first to use it. Not philosophy itself, but the term. Well, so very quickly, just so you have an idea of some facts from his life. I wrote it up here, very much in the style of, if one day you want to make a biographical summary using study techniques, this is what we do. I even put in too many words. We use words, and these words suggest images to you. Absolutely nothing is used in vain. So, I listed a few topics for us to visualize his life. He is from this period, 570 to 495 BC. He could be considered a pre-Socratic philosopher. That is, before Socrates and Plato. However, many times, contemporary philosophy does not even consider him a philosopher because he lived in an environment with so many rules. Rules that were oriented toward the sacred, toward morality, so that often Pythagoras, Plotinus, are considered more like a sect. It is not considered as philosophy. I find this curious, but I'll address the reasoning behind why people speak this way. For me, he is a philosopher. To me, Pythagoras was a philosopher. He lived during that time, which is a typical period of the pre-Socratics. In fact, he even interacted with Thales of Miletus, and he learned something from him. He was born on an island called Samos, and this island emerged there. In fact, his family was quite successful. His father was a merchant who traveled a lot. But then a tyrant named Polycrates appeared there, and things took a turn for the worse. Tyranny and philosophy have never gone together throughout history. It is an enmity, I believe, that is irreconcilable. So, when a tyrant appeared in Samos, it was no longer possible for Pythagoras to stay there. Then he went to Egypt. While he was doing very well in Egypt, learning, no one knows exactly how long he stayed there, another tyrant appeared. It was Cambyses the Persian. He expelled him from the country. So, he went to Babylon. From Babylon, Persia, and then he went to India. In that region, somewhere along the way, he is said to have met a man whom he referred to as the mage, who taught him many things. This mage, no one knows exactly who he was, but it is intriguing. We know that the priests of Zoroaster in Persia were called magi. And Pythagoras' knowledge took into account many elements that were also characteristic of that context. That is, from Zoroastrianism. Then he left and said he went to India. To India, just imagine that. There are Indian writings that recall Yavanacharya, the Ionian master who passed through here. In other words, there was a Greek here, and he was well regarded. Yavanacharya passed through here in such and such a year. Then, tired of wandering, he returned once again to his island. By then, Polycrates, who was the tyrant, had already died. There, for the first time, he founded a school that he called the semicircle. Who knows where he got that idea from? You know, besides everything else, Pythagoras also created the term mathematics. The word, which, among other things, meant mathematical. We know Pythagoras mostly because of the theorem, even though he contributed a number of other equally important things. For example, the system of musical notation with musical intervals in the way we know it today. Basically, he discovered these intervals, these harmonic intervals. And he possessed a very broad knowledge across various fields. Then he decided to leave Samos and go to the south of Italy, to a small place called Croton, which, for some reason, he believed would be more suitable for carrying out his work. It was a somewhat more remote location. I think he felt it would be harder to be disturbed there, because Samos was very busy. It was there that he established his school, which became known as the Pythagorean Museum. The museum was a system of monasteries where the disciples lived inside. They lived under very strict discipline, where this code was followed rigorously. And in addition to a few other things not included in this code, such as, for example, the obligation to keep a journal. It might seem like a trivial thing, right? But Pythagoras considered it fundamental for you to reflect on what you did during your day, to see if you are aligned with your ideals. Because if you are not, you can correct it tomorrow. But if you go a whole year without making corrections, you might end up straying so far from your ideal that it may no longer be possible to go back. And there were a series of doctrines and rules for living, some understandable, others not so much, some that seem to us to be more well-see, others that appear fanciful. But this code was strictly enforced. There, he gets married. This disciple of his, Theanos of Crete, has a daughter, Mila. If anyone is thinking of having children, Mila. Sophia is a good suggestion, a name that ended up belonging to one of his disciples as well. At a certain point, the full story, though we won't go into those details now, shows that joining the Pythagorean school was no trivial matter, because he did not want to take an ordinary person and do make them honest before passing on the teachings. That would have been impractical. The very least he required was that the individual enter already honest, and only then would he share the teachings. So, honesty and coherence were considered prerequisites just to set foot inside. I often joke, though sometimes people misunderstand me, that it was like a kind of entrance exam. Now, imagine an entrance exam that requires a person to be honest, upright, consistent, and good. That's an entrance exam for which there is no preparatory course in the world that could help. So, many people failed. I believe the tests were very tough, putting people in situations where they felt exposed, embarrassed, or where it was very tempting to lie. In other words, these were situations designed to see if a person could maintain their integrity, and there were a lot of people who didn't get through. A good number of people, in fact. Then there was a certain individual whose name is mentioned here somewhere. Silem was. He was the son of a certain powerful politician from southern Italy, and he was determined to join, but he simply was not fit to be admitted. And he truly failed, because Pythagoras was not one to make exceptions. If you didn't meet the standards, you simply didn't pass. Feeling offended by this rejection, he stirred up the people from the nearby city of Croton, claiming that Pythagoras was a sorcerer. That's an easy thing to do. Slander is a simple business. Especially if the person is influential, has power, and possesses strong rhetorical skills, slander is something that spreads quickly. Since Pythagoras, among other things, had a deep knowledge of astronomy, he had the habit of saying, "Look, there will be an eclipse." That was decisive. There will be, I don't know, a climate change. Who else knows about this? No one knows. He must be the one causing it. He's a sorcerer. There's no way to know these things. So, from spreading rumors, to people believing them, to becoming enraged, it's just a small step. We are well acquainted with the stages of this process. And so, they truly demolished, attacked, burned, and destroyed the school of Croton. It is said that even Pythagoras himself may have perished there. A handful of disciples managed to survive, and they carried on Pythagoreanism through history for several centuries. And this Lysis is said to have been particularly concerned with writing the golden verses. We'll see soon. Then, a group of people continued to pass this knowledge forward. I've included this here, though it may not be directly relevant, but this knowledge reached us through Heracles of Alexandria around 430–430 AD. AD. He was the one who, for the first time, wrote this in Latin. He was a disciple of Plutarch. He wrote this in Latin, and it endured through time. It was later translated into Western languages by Fabio de Oliveira in the 19th century. In short, this story was passed down in this way. And that was Pythagoras. What was known about him in Plato's time? Plato already said, we know almost nothing. And Plato lived about a century later. But we do know that he deduced the entire universe from numbers, that from the decade, he deduced the manifestation of the universe from the moment it emerges from zero. And it goes from 1 up to 10, where everything returns to 1 and then back to 0. Even the Tetractys, which was a representation of 10. For him, it was the representation of the manifestation of the universe. For him, the purpose of the universe was harmony. He believed in reincarnation, that human beings possess a divine essence, which passes through various layers. In short, some elements have endured. And this beautiful moral code, which we'll discover. Isn't that right? So let's continue. I will speak a little about him. These are the golden verses of Pythagoras, according to the version translated by this individual. Hierarchs of Alexandria. It is interesting because there was a man named, that's right, someone from Alexandria who translated the life of another sage who has nothing to do with Pythagoras, but is responsible for the life of Apollonius of Tyana. This Philo would say, look, Pythagoras was a man who not only knew deeply who he was, but he also knew profoundly and in detail everything he had already been in other lives. And this information from Philo is something quite curious. I don't know where he heard it from, but it reinforces the idea that, indeed, within the Pythagorean school, there was a belief in reincarnation. Pythagoras himself followed and believed in this idea. He believed that the essential task of a human being was to find the number, the essence that exists within each person, the idea that gave you your origin, and to harmonize it with all the other units of the universe. Well, with that said, let's move on. Let's begin with our code of Pythagoras' golden code. In other words, that which, as Plato would later say, would transform men into men of gold. Always remember, because this is an idea that was later greatly distorted. The other day, I heard this on the internet. It really almost killed me. Whenever I say, nothing will ever surprise me on the internet again, the next day, something scandalous appears. So I can't say that anymore. I've realized that this tempts karma, as the Indians would say. Because the other day, someone sent me something claiming that medieval alchemists were just ambitious people who wanted nothing more than to transform, lead into gold to mint coins and become rich. I almost died when I heard something like that. Why? The medieval alchemists, the gold they sought was the philosophical gold. They wanted to transform men of lead into men of gold. What they sought was wisdom. They were all Hermetists. They were all followers of the tradition of Hermes Christ. There was no one there driven by ambition, wanting to mint coins. That's not the idea at all. On the contrary, alchemy is a tradition. We even have a lecture about this on YouTube. It is deeply inherited from everything we are discussing here, because Pythagoras learned much from Egypt. So, when they spoke of transforming beings into golden beings, hence the golden verses, men of gold, it did not mean turning them into physical gold, but rather into people who can no longer be corrupted by their environment, which is the defining trait of gold. Gold does not lose its characteristics, regardless of the environment in which it is found. Not even human skin, which would tarnish a common metal. If your ring were made of an ordinary metal, it would turn black in a short time. But gold does not. Do you know why? Because it remains true to itself, regardless of its surroundings. And that is what was expected of human beings. And this is exactly what Pythagoras is proposing here. That is why they are called golden verses, verses of gold, to shape men of gold. And he swears that it works, which is the most remarkable and interesting thing. I have never seen masters of such stature swear by anything, but he does. So, there is a great likelihood that this is truly something of value. Now, he begins these verses from 1 to 3. Shall we talk about them? About the matter of honor, which is something very interesting, closely connected to gratitude, to recognition, to respect, and to the ability to truly see. This ceremonial approach to life, which you will find in Eastern traditions, the veneration of ancestors, the reverence for the spirits of nature, the act of honoring and recognizing what is most beautiful. Notice that we live in a time where we remember things by their worst aspects. We have replaced gratitude with morbidity. Every time I'll talk about Egypt, someone brings up, but what about Cleopatra? I'll talk about Rome and Caligula and Nero. All right, there's Caligula and Nero, there's Cleopatra, but can't you remember something better? My past, oh, I suffered so much at that time. So and so, do you know them? Oh yes, I know them, they talk too much. For goodness sake, don't they have any good qualities? You realize that we recall things based on their appearance. By the worst? At this moment, the idea was honor. That is, honor means to remember and to give thanks for everything by focusing on its best qualities. So here, he begins by speaking about the gods, within a polytheistic tradition, right? First and foremost, honor the immortal gods, as the law commands. Now, remember, you may have already heard about this, and Plato himself was a great student of the knowledge of many masters, including Pythagoras, and he spoke a lot about this subject. You do not honor God or the gods, regardless of the tradition, because they need it, for they need nothing. The one who needs it is you. You are the one who needs to remember the divine attributes. You need not only to remember them, but also to find them within yourself. They are not in need of anything at all. But you are. There is something very interesting about this Apollonius of Tyana, whom I mentioned to you, who is a much later sage, already from the beginning of the Christian era, enters a temple where they were performing an animal sacrifice, which was very common in religions of that time, though already somewhat in decline. He enters this temple, shouting, as someone recounts. He bursts in, shouting, and says, "Abstain from washing your altars in blood." The only sacrifice that is desirable to the gods is the sacrifice of your animal self upon the altars of wisdom. Do you understand? What is a divine being? Whether in a monotheistic or polytheistic tradition, what would a divine being, by virtue of being divine, need from you to possess? Is he not divine? The only thing he needs from you is your evolution, because that is something he cannot force. He cannot force you to grow, because there is a somewhat inconvenient law called free will, which means you only evolve if you choose to. In other words, the only thing you can offer him that holds any value for him, because he cannot obtain it on his own, is your evolution. The sacrifice of your animal self on the altars of wisdom. So, this is the idea of the sacred office, the sacred duty of remembering. The divine attributes, including finding them within yourself, which is the most important philosophical element. Not only will see them outside ourselves, but to recognize them within yourself in such a way that you connect with the divine through affinity and not out of fear or desire. Through affinity, I recognize the divine because I feel its attributes within myself. Honor, justice, kindness, I see these within me. So I am drawn toward them. I know that if they exist within, they also exist outside, and I am drawn toward them. It is not a relationship based on interests, desires, or fears, but on affinity. So, the first thing I must do is recognize the attributes of the divine and strive to develop them within myself. Therefore, honor, above all, the immortal gods, as the law commands. Next, revere the oath you have taken. This is something I find truly fascinating. Humanity changes in its cultural concepts, doesn't it? Internally, we don't change that much, but culture. Sometimes it invites us to rise, sometimes it invites us to remain still, and sometimes it invites us to descend. Because it's remarkable, our historical moment has an aversion to commitment. And, in that era, commitment was considered the best thing in the world. It was usually about commitment. Do you know what they used to say? Want to climb the mountain? This is just an example. I'm making it up now. But it's as if you wanted to climb the mountain just by holding on with your hands. No, take a rope, a hook, fasten it up there. If you slip, hold onto the rope, because sometimes you won't fall. That's what a commitment is. I made a vow, I made a commitment. I'll finish this life having become at least a little better than when I started. I'll be less critical, I'll be less selfish, I'll be more fraternal, I'll think more about others when making my decisions. I made a vow, so when my personality wants to back out, I hold onto the rope. Wait, you can't do something like that. It is something sworn before that which is most sacred to you. This commitment is called Rava. We protect ourselves from falling at the moment when our personality becomes heavy and the law of psychological gravity brings us down. The law of physics brings us down from time to time, but that's not so serious. We get back up again. But when the psyche falls, sometimes it's hard to get back up. The commitment to love. No, I made a commitment. I committed myself to humanity. I committed myself to being a human being. Even more, I committed myself to making a difference in people's lives. Today, we are almost afraid of commitment. When we fall, what do we hold on to? There's nothing to hold on to, so we really do fall. I don't want to care about anything anymore. And you really won't, because there's nothing to counterbalance these crises, these moments of inertia that the psyche experiences from time to time, these tendencies, the abyss that sometimes exists within us. There is nothing to counterbalance it. Jung, he used to say that when he was alive, because, between us, I personally prefer Jung, but those experiments he did with the unconscious, I am amazed at how he didn't lose his mind. Because it's such a high level of risk for the human psyche. Enormous. He would say, do you know why I come back? Out of love. Love for people, love for humanity, love for the commitments I made to my patients. If it weren't for love, I wouldn't come back. These deep dives I take, because he worked with alchemy, he worked with complex symbolism, and sometimes it's something truly wild. When you read that, you say, my God, this man has gone mad. How? He would say, because of love. In other words, love was his lifeline. It pulled, held, and drew him back. That is the commitment. All disciples must be sworn in with what is most sacred to them, which, in general, cannot be communicated to anyone. That which is most sacred within me. It is something that must be discovered. Sometimes, for a person, it is the image of their father, who is very just. Before that image, I make my commitment, he'll never give this up, not in my entire life. The world may fall apart, but this I will not relinquish, he'll be just. Ah, but no one else is. It doesn't matter. I have sworn this commitment before the memory of my father. Do you understand? The whole world became corrupted. No, I remained standing. Why? Because I held on to the rope. And what is the rope? Commitment. Now, our culture says that you shouldn't have a rope. What do you think that is? That is a tendency toward free fall, and an extraordinary one at that. So, it was one of the most important elements. Commitment. Honor your vows, for that is the only thing that will keep you standing when crises come. Because they will come, there is no way around it. We'll soon talk about nature, about the geography of the earth, which has peaks and valleys. And we live, something within us is part of the earth's geography. Then, the illustrious heroes, full of kindness and light, which is fundamental. Here, Plato really went deep, because he took this idea, developed it as much as he could, and even beyond what he could. He would say, a hero is fundamental. Do you know why? Let's say you belong to, I don't know, the Greek Orphic religion. I believe in Apollo. All right, Apollo is wonderful and represents beauty and harmony. That's where the name without poles comes from. You are a Greek inspired by Apollo, but look, Apollo is far from you. Do you really think you'll become like him in this life? Becoming like Apollo isn't possible. He's divine, and I'm a human being. Isn't that reason enough for you to lose motivation to grow? No matter how hard I try, I won't become like him. He's just too far beyond. Now, what about the person who was right beside you just now, and who, in a difficult situation, channeled the best within themselves and did something remarkable for humanity? They made a great sacrifice, offered something significant, dedicated their life to a cause. Oh no, not that person. That person isn't Apollo. That person is my next-door neighbor, the son of Mrs. So-and-so. That's all. It's not possible. If he can do it, then I can too. Do you see? If he can do it, then I can too. Just a short while ago, this morning, I was watching the news about a father who lost a child in that recent attack in Spain. And he said the following, what do I want to ask? What I'll do now? I want to embrace someone from the Islamic faith. So he went to a mosque, to that very mosque where there was suspicion of some involvement with the attack, found the imam of the current faith, embraced him, and so on. There's a photograph of the two of them embracing. He said, look, my son is dead, and now I want to fight against hatred. That is truly a beautiful thing. Then you ask yourself, for the current state of humanity, isn't this already a heroic level? Yes. This kind of thing should be remembered, shown, and shared. Because when someone suffers violence, people tend to respond with hatred. Hatred makes you become the same, or violent, or similar. You do not fight violence with hatred. You end up resembling it, because what provoked the violence in the first place was hatred. Do you understand? To know what it is to lose a child. What do I want now? I want to embrace a Muslim. That is what I want to do right now. And Nelson Mandela, who spent 26 years in prison and then forgave everyone and brought people together. He included everyone in his government and integrated everything. Can you imagine if he hadn't done that, what history would have been like? Afterwards, how would the conflicts have continued? Are there many people who do this? No. So, is a man of this stature already a hero? And is he perfect? No, he is not. He must have had many family problems, argued with his wife, separated, married a second time, and so on. But look, the average person in humanity would not reach such a level of greatness, of forgiveness, of the ability to integrate, to hold something like that in their heart. 26 years inside a cell so small you couldn't even stretch out, because there wasn't enough space. Do you realize that the average person in humanity doesn't reach that level? A hero is not perfect. He is not so far away that you lose sight of him, but he is also not so close that he can't serve as a reference for you. A hero is that person you look at and say, if he could do it, then I can too. He restores one of the most sacred things, which is faith in humanity. That's why Plato used to say, there must be heroes. A good state cultivates the memory of its heroes. This is fundamental. A hero is not an exceptional being. He is someone who, compared to the average of humanity, has taken a leap forward. That alone is enough to remind us of our humanity, because remembering how low we can fall, the daily news reminds us of that. But what about how high we can rise? Because no one wants to go down, we want to rise. And that is the essential memory. So, honor your heroes. Next, honor your parents. Forgive me, I skipped one. Fourth, then pay tribute to the earthly spirits and show them the proper respect. This is a Pythagorean idea, and it is also deeply Eastern, because at times like this, we can truly suspect that he traveled through India. For these peoples, everything was imbued with life. The earth is filled with spirits, with beings who watch over every single thing. So they had such great respect for. You notice how curious this is, how nowadays an inanimate object, like this table, we treat it carelessly, use it any way we want, Dhammapada, everything, we ruin everything. Imagine that, humbly, this object is serving you and, therefore, deserves respect. The way you treat the small things. They believe that everything is endowed with some degree of life. The spirits of the earth, the water, the air, the fire, which medieval alchemy spoke so much about, everything is imbued with life in some way. Everything has an essence that humbly serves you and is also undergoing its own evolution. We have a professor of financial economics at New Acropolis who often says, if you want to know how a person is, economically speaking, one of the indicators is this: how do they treat their belongings at home, the little things? If everything is broken, everything is damaged, and at the first sign of a defect it goes straight to the trash. He says, look, this is one of the things that measures a person's success and balance in financial life, how they treat their belongings, no matter how small, and the respect they have for them. So, to honor and respect the spirits that are present in nature. For them, everything is life. This is a theory that later fell into great discredit, which is something called Pan. God, which means God in all things. Then they created an expression, pantheism, which became a heresy after the Middle Ages. Pantheism is simply the belief that everything has something sacred and deserves respect. God is everywhere. In other words, this existed within the Pythagorean school. I think it would be good if it still existed. In all things, there is something sacred that deserves respect. Honor always your parents and all the members of your family. This seems so obvious, doesn't it? But it isn't. The other day, I was listening to someone speak. It's very trendy right now. In our current historical moment, there is a kind of self-help technique. Which, by the way, philosophy has nothing to do with self-help. Our historical moment is addicted to and sick with selfishness. I would not leave my home just to teach someone to do even more for themselves. People already do that all the time. Philosophy is about thinking a little more about others. Perhaps it would be about changing the idea of help. A bit more fraternity, more altruism. I don't think it's wrong to think about oneself. But look, manipulating the entire world for our own comfort, that is the root of all the world's problems. Of course, I'm exaggerating. The Tibetan tradition says that behind all the problems in the world, there is hidden selfishness. We have too much selfishness. So, when he talks about relating to family, it reminded me of this episode. The person said the following, which comes from the best of intentions. You should not become alienated by work and stop valuing your family or stop valuing your friends. Always value them. You will see that there will come a time when you will need them. When you face a difficulty, it is to them that you will be able to turn. When you have a problem, it is with them that you will be able to count. Wow, how beautiful, everyone applauded. But I kept thinking, if I think about family and friends only because I might need them, that is not friendship, that is a private pension plan. Or am I wrong? Let's be honest. What if I need them, for heaven's sake? This is another human being. There is something divine there. I love them because I love them, not because I might need them. What is that? Do you realize how crazy this is? It can't be like that. If they need me, then that's good. All the time, thinking that things can serve me. That old story from Tolstoy, there are those who go into a forest and see only firewood for their own fire. In other words, what if I need it? What if it gets cold at home? So we'll become an environmentalist. You'll preserve this forest, just in case. Let's be honest. It's a hypothetical imperative. If you nurture your family, you'll have someone to take care of you in the future. Let's be honest. A categorical imperative. Care for your family because they are human beings. And you have the obligation to recognize in another human being a portion of the divine, a part of yourself, a piece of who you are. Because we are all, in a way, like cells of a single unity. Care for them for who they are, not for what they can give you. Do you understand how delicate this is? I return to this point and reiterate to you, any political, social, individual, or collective problem in society, any challenge you may encounter. Find one where selfishness is not behind it. If we reach a certain point, excuse me for saying this, but we even manipulate God. Even God. Suppose I go through a hardship. There must be someone to protect me. I've shared this in many of my talks because I truly appreciate Ida prayer from the ancient teacher Sophia Rabia, Devia, a strong and uplifting figure. I find it beautiful, and she used to say the following, "My Lord, my God, if I seek you out of desire for your heaven, cast me out of your heaven. If I seek you out of fear of your hell, burn me in your hell. But if I seek you solely for who you are, receive me into the embrace of your glory." Do you understand? For the love of God, even when manipulated, it is still God. Plato used to say that worse than not believing in the gods is believing in them and thinking you can buy them. So be careful with this kind of thing. When he says, honor the family, it truly means to honor. There is nothing wrong with a private pension plan, as long as you give things their proper names. Family is family, something else is something else. Friends are friends, something else is something else. Be careful with selfishness, everyone. It is everywhere, especially in a place that is within ourselves. And that is where we must take a stand against it. Well, then, as I mentioned to you, this part is mainly about the importance of honor and the oath, which is the little summary I made here on the side. So, at the very beginning, the importance of honor and the oath. PTE greetings, we have concluded this section. It is important to keep this idea in mind. Now, let's move on to number 6. Among others, choose as your friend the wisest and most virtuous. You have probably heard of him. Of Socrates, the philosopher, who was extensively portrayed by Plato, who was his disciple. However, when Plato writes his dialogues, the Socrates who appears as a character, I believe, is more a reflection of Plato himself than of Socrates in his true essence. Now, there is another book that tells the story of Socrates, written by another disciple, Xenophon, in which Socrates appears as a more modest, more human figure. I believe that Plato's Socrates was actually Plato himself, because he is portrayed as an almost divine being. I know that Xenophon, at a certain point, shows Socrates meeting a young man who was Cretan, and Socrates says to him, "Go, my young friend, go in search of virtuous hearts. Keep virtuous hearts around you." You might think this is selfish, and what about those who are not virtuous? Won't he help them? Love everyone, but for your inner circle, bring in the good ones. Croton? Of course, of course. Because you must always have a deep connection with someone. It is so that you are constantly a motivation for that person to grow, and they are a motivation for you to grow, and the bonds are formed around this, up above. Every bond of deep and true love is a link that helps us climb the mountain together. If you slip, I'll hold on to you. We will reach the top together. There is only one thing I'll do. If you decide to go back down, then you go down alone. But if you want to climb, I'll be with you. If you slip, you'll catch you. And if I slip, you'll catch me. In other words, for your inner circle, bring in the virtuous. Now, love everyone. And try, in some way, through your example, to awaken them to virtue. And the unions described in Plato's book, she himself is greatly inspired by Socrates' example. He says that unions must be formed around the silent pack to grow together. To climb, you can always count on me. To descend, go down alone. This would be a very pedagogical recommendation. In short, this is the matter of friendship. Take advantage of their gentle words and learn from their actions, which are useful and virtuous. Make sure that you are a positive influence in the lives of those with whom you interact. Now, he is going to warn us about something important. You, your friend. The people who live most closely with you, whom you have brought into your inner circle, who possess virtues that are inspiring, yes, they have inspiring virtues, but they also have vices. They are dual, they are in the world, they are not perfect. Taoism often says that every light has a shadow hidden behind it. That is how it is in the material world. So, I'm very organized. But if something very complicated happens to you, let's say, losing your job, or losing someone you love, won't that throw you into disarray? It will. So, disorganization is in the shadow, lurking and waiting for its moment. You are not 100% organized. In the context of what happens, I'm organized. No. In most cases, I have mastered it, but the shadow is there, waiting for an opening to strike. Well, then you will have friends who are dual, and you yourself are dual as well. And when that shadow strikes, do you abandon your friend? Of course not. You stand by them in the struggle between light and shadow. Let me try to help you imagine a situation. There is someone you know very well, a friend. Most of the time, this person is thoughtful, balanced, and clear-minded. But today, they lost control. Something happened that really unsettled them. As they speak to you, it's as if you can see inside them. You see both the friend you know and the stubborn child, as described by Anishilek. It's as if you separate the two and begin to speak with your friend. Even though it's the stubborn child speaking now, you choose to ignore that. It's as if there were another person present. And you speak as if you were talking to the friend you know. This person feels divided within themselves, and she begins to have the strength to fight against the child, the stubborn child. Do you see what I mean? They are not just one, they are two. I'll ignore the child, the stubborn child. I'll speak to the person I know. I'm giving them strength. I'm calling them forth. Making a call for them to awaken and fight. And the stubborn child, I ignore. In that moment, they are together. They seem like one, but they are not. They are two. Within us, it is the same. They seem like one, but they are not. They are two. There are times when the child will appear. The stubborn child. And if your friend turns to you and treats you as what he knows you to be, he allies himself with you to fight the child. The stubborn child. And then you have a much greater strength. So he is going to talk about this in a way that I find very beautiful. Just listen. But do not push your friend away for a small mistake, because power is limited by necessity. Do you know what that means? A man who no longer has base, coarse needs is a being who is not even a hero anymore, he's almost a divine being. In our current moment, our flaws create limitations, they create needs. And our power is limited by these needs. Sometimes we are victorious over them, sometimes we lose. The power that this man has to remain virtuous is sometimes limited by his own needs. For example, someone is in love and loses their partner. The need created by that passion can sometimes weaken his power. And on that day, he is beside himself, he is outside of his true self. In other words, his true self is here, and over there is his body acting foolishly. It is as if you are bringing him back into himself again. It is calling him back to reality. In other words, we have limits. And sometimes these limits challenge our power. Ideally, our power should increasingly prevail over our needs. Our needs should align with our human nature. But at this moment, we have many needs that do not align at all with the nobility that is expected of a human being. Sometimes we are complacent, sometimes we are lazy, sometimes we are selfish, sometimes we are overly driven by our passions, we become attached to trivial things, and we are vain. And sometimes these artificial needs overpower our strength. But, your friend, would I abandon you at a time like this? You are an excellent person, where light prevails, but you have a strength that, at some point, will be limited by necessity. In that moment, count on me. Of course, you can always count on me, but especially at that time, I'll stand by your side and fight with you. So, he speaks about this in a very beautiful way. In other words, this part is about having a virtuous friend, learning from them, forgiving them, and understanding the limits between strength and necessity. In summary, here, friendship, how to cultivate true friendship. Cicero speaks very eloquently about this in Laelius on friendship. Friendships are formed for this very reason. They are a pact between the best qualities we possess, not a complicity in each other's flaws. Complicity in flaw society is full of that. A group of, corrupt or dishonest people who come together to steal. Is that really friendship? Of course not. In fact, the first chance they get, they will turn on each other and steal from one another. Is that friendship? That is merely a complicity in each other's flaws. It would be wise for us to take a good look at all the relationships we have in our lives. For example, cliques, little groups of gossipers. Gossipers are experts at forming complicity around flaws. There's no fun in gossiping alone. You need someone to listen, to share, and preferably to pass it on. A solitary gossiper has no prospects, isn't that right? So, these little groups of gossipers are usually a pact of flaws, not of virtues. If we were within the Indian tradition, I would pause to explain to you how this is where collective karma and dharma are born. People come together around their flaws, or around their virtues, and they are drawn together again in order to pay for the consequences that their flaws have generated. Or they are drawn together again to continue walking the path of the virtues they have built together. Both are factors of attraction. But that is another story. It's no use looking at me with those faces, thinking you'll talk, because that has nothing to do with this. And then, in sentence 10, he moves on to another topic and begins to talk about passions. Take the following very seriously. You must face and overcome your passions. Remember the centaur. The centaur is the human who rules over the animal. The torso of a human, the body of a horse, in other words, the human rules over the animal. The animal is not evil, but it was made to serve you, not the other way around. It is not the rider who carries the horse, that would be absurd. A man who is enslaved by his instincts and passions is like a rider carrying the horse on his back. We will always have elements that connect us to the world, and they are not bad. We need them. But they were not made to make decisions in our lives. They were not meant to dominate. So, be careful. It's not about eliminating your instincts. Instincts are useful. Not even passions, they can even be enjoyable. It's like a good chocolate bar. But look, be careful not to let them dominate you. So take this very seriously. The following is important. One must face and overcome their passions. First, gluttony, then laziness, lust, and anger. All those things that, when they take over your mind, make you end up carrying the horse on your back. In other words, what prevails is the animal, regardless of the human form. When you use a product from the supermarket, you check if it's meant to clean the floor, if it's for washing dishes, or if it's for dusting. And you say, this is a detergent, not because of the label, but because of its contents. The human label alone is not enough for you to say, this is a human being. What prevails inside must be what is truly human. Otherwise, there is potential, but it is not yet realized. We are human when what prevails within us is our humanity. At this moment, we are all very human. Now, we'll see if someone down in the parking lot doesn't irritate us. Right? We are striving to keep our human condition in command, which does not mean that you shouldn't be firm, gentle, fair, or do whatever is necessary, but always without losing your center. In fact, it is impossible to be just if you lose your human nature. If you lose your human nature, you will become vengeful. That is not justice. Justice requires balance. Justice requires impartiality. Do not do, whether with others or alone, anything that would bring you shame. So anything unworthy, if you would not do it in front of someone else, do not do it when you are alone with yourself. From time to time, observe this because it is so telling and so interesting. Notice your posture when I'm sitting alone at home in my room, the way you handle your own belongings. When it's not just for show, not just for appearances. There isn't an Englishman anywhere from here to England. In other words, when I am with myself, do you know what that means? Self-respect. To truly see, to recognize that within me there is something that demands respect otherwise. I'm totally a character created for opinion, for someone else's approval. And what about me? Where is my essence? Does it not deserve respect? I've already told this story 350 times to those of you who attend my lectures, but I'll tell it another 350 times. Because, who knows, maybe Pythagoras was right and reincarnation exists, so you'll be born already knowing this. This is the story of that Zen master whose monastery was falling apart. The disciples came to him and said, "Master, we're going to have to renovate this monastery because it's about to collapse on our heads." And the master thought, great. These masters are remarkable. Everything is an opportunity for a lesson, isn't it? They are remarkable. I'm going to put these students to the test. He thought this to himself. He went to them and said, "It's true, the monastery is falling apart. But we don't have any resources. You should go to the nearest village and steal so that we can get the resources to renovate the monastery. Steal everything you can. But there's only one condition. Don't let anyone see you, because think about the reputation of the monastery. These are generations of respectability. So steal everything, but with one condition. No one can see you." It's an existential, profound conflict. The disciples are bewildered. Is this possible? Has the master lost his mind? No, but that's just how it is. Blah, blah, the ends justify the means, Machiavelli, Zen, blah, blah, all that talk. They went. Then he gets up. When he enters the monastery, there was one who had stayed behind, doing his tasks. He asked, "My boy, what are you doing?" "Master, I'm doing what you told me to do." "What do you mean you're doing what I told you to do?" "Look, everyone else went to the city to steal." "No, but wait a minute. You said we shouldn't steal if someone was watching me. I'm watching myself all the time. How could I steal?" Do you know there is life within you, a life that deserves respect? Breathed in awareness of truly seeing. If you cannot see this, you will not truly see anyone else. You will end up using others. I'm permanently accompanied by my immortal essence, and it deserves respect. And if it does not deserve respect, then no one else will deserve it either. External respect will be nothing more than manipulation. Respect comes from Respasir, to look, once again, to know how to truly see. He will talk about this very soon, about self-respect. So do not do alone what you would not do to others. Why is that? If I were Robinson Crusoe and lived on an island, what would I do? Well, that is my morality. Those are my principles. You are what you do when the last door closes behind you, when it locks behind you. Well, he will continue this passage. So, we spoke about overcoming passions and developing modesty, which I included here in the summary. Modesty is something very different from shame. This is the Platonic definition. Plato said that shame is a bad thing. Let's say I ask her, go over there and open the door downstairs, because the entrance is locked. I need you to open it, because someone wants to come in for the lecture. If I feel ashamed, that's not good. Is someone going to miss the lecture because you're too embarrassed to open the door? That is not good. Now, doing something that is wrong because of a moral failing and not wanting others to know so as not to offend them, that is not shame, that is modesty. I had a moral failing. I am not going to publish it in today's newspaper. I will try to correct myself quietly, for your sake. I offer you the best that I have. Or, I made a mistake and I say, I'm ashamed of it. Didn't say that, made a mistake. So what? What does that have to do with you? I'm like this. They put their mistakes on display. That is a lack of modesty. You realize that when you make a mistake and feel ashamed of it, in other words, it is modesty, it is a positive kind of shame, and you have a chance to correct yourself. But if you make a mistake and feel proud of it, you are lost, or maybe not. Modesty is what still gives us an opportunity for reconciliation. Modesty is not pretense. I'm telling you that I'm perfect. I'm full of flaws. Now, if I invite you to my home, I'll put a vase of flowers on the table and not. Look, the trash is over there. It's out in the yard. I'm not trying to say that I don't have any trash. Of course I do. I'm not lying to you, nor am I hiding the worst parts of myself. I'm, out of dignity and respect, offering you the best that I have. I am not proud of my trash can. But the fact is, it's there. I'm hiding that from you. And when there is no modesty, the possibility for correction, we fall into what we call amorality. The possibility for correction becomes very small. So, one of the things he addresses at this point is precisely this question of modesty. Continuing on, he says, above all, respect yourself. We have already talked a lot about this. Kant uses this concept extensively. He says it is the main one, the first of the virtues that I respect. You do not respect a human being for themselves, for their material characteristics. You respect their capacity, their humility, to bow so that a divine law may come into the world through them. Do you understand? So, let me see. People from my generation here might remember that when we were kids. At least that was the case for me in public school, back in the early grades. When the teacher entered the classroom, we had to stand up. Do you remember that? Everyone would stand up. You don't stand up for the person of the teacher, but rather for the sacrifice that person makes in a profession that, at times, is not well paid or recognized by society, yet they are there, sacrificing themselves so that some understanding may reach those children. Do you rise in the presence of that virtue? No one stands up just for a human being. You stand up in the presence of the humility that this person had to allow a law to come into the world through them. You respect that, and for that you must know how to truly see. That is respacy. To know how to see. To look once more, to see in depth. He says, if you do not have this virtue, you will not have any other. If you are not able to see the most beautiful thing that this person expresses, what will you see in them? Only the appearance. And then you will use the other as a means for your own pleasure, for your own satisfaction, for your own interests. He says, this is the height of immorality. To use beings as a means and not as an end in themselves. If you do not respect them, you do not truly see them. You only see the packaging. This is from Immanuel Kant, Foundations of the Metaphysics of Morals. Practice justice through your actions. And through your words, that is, coherence. Practice justice with both your actions and your words. I always tell a story that comes from a Platonic dialogue called Gorgias. Like most Platonic dialogues, it's Socrates debating with a group of people. In this case, he was debating with a sophist. Sophists, I won't go into too much detail, but they were professionals who received money to teach, and they would teach anything for which they were paid. So they were not exactly moral exemplars. This sophist who was debating with him was named Polycrates, or something like that. The main sophist was Gorgias, but he was debating with Polycrates. He comes up to him and says the following: "Look, don't run away from the dialogue. You know why? If you convince me that you are right, tomorrow you will find me on the street, living out what you said." Do not shy away from taking your argument all the way to the end, because, of course, the sophists, when they started to debate with Socrates, would begin to lose and then want to leave. He says, "Look, no, you have to see it through to the end. What if you are right? If you are right, tomorrow you will find me on the street living what you are talking about." People, can you imagine someone having the integrity to say something like that? If you convince me that this belief I have held my whole life, for 50 or 30 years, is wrong, tomorrow you will find me living something different. It's very coherent for a person to be confident like that. I stand by myself. Callicles, sorry, there was a mix-up with the names. He debates with Callicles and says this. And that is what Pythagoras is saying here. As Helena Blavatsky used to say, the ray of truth must be united with practice coherent in thought, word, and action. If you are convinced that an idea is true, tomorrow you must be out in the street fighting to live it, or else. There is a certain conflict within you between what you reflect, what you think, what you say, what you live, and this conflict will make you nobody, because one thing cancels out the other and you will not get anywhere. Nowhere at all. And establish the habit of never acting thoughtlessly. Within the Golden Verses, this is the most recurring recommendation. I found it amusing when I saw this. It is the recommendation he repeats the most. He goes so far as to repeat the same thing 4 times, expressed in different ways, but always the same message. Do not act without first giving yourself time to reflect and think. Do not act thoughtlessly. It is useless for me to teach you the most wonderful moral principles in the history of humanity if, when it comes time to act, you do not think. They are all there, on one side, in your memory, but you don't access them. You may possess universal wisdom. But when it comes time to act, if you don't think, what good is it? You just do anything. So, this separation between knowledge and the application of knowledge requires self-control. It requires that you know how to restrain the impulse of your passions in order to think. Principles, what do you advise me? And the more you practice, the quicker you become. This is the Platonic concept of courage. Did you know that? For Plato, courage does not depend on what you do, but on the basis for which you do it. Courage is maintaining the rule of reason in situations of fear and desire, pain and pleasure. It's on fire. I studied all the concepts of fraternity, humanity, but when it's on fire, forget it, you just trample over everyone. You know that when there's a fire, more people die from being trampled than from being burned. In other words, fear I hold back the panic, I maintain the rule of reason. That is a courageous citizen. The instinct wants to take off running, but you hold it back, that's it. Or desire, which sometimes is even worse. History tells us that desire is worse. Do you know why? Fire. You know it's your enemy. And what's the name of that popular actor, the one who's Angelina Jolie's husband? Brad Pitt. Do you know that's a danger? It seems interesting. But sometimes it can pull you just as far away from your life as fire can. But Brad Pitt and fire are very different things. Goodbye. Then Aristotle says, look, desire is worse because you don't recognize it as an enemy, and sometimes it can ruin your life just as much as fear. It seems like an ally. So, maintaining the rule of reason doesn't mean that all the Brad Pitts in the world must be avoided. No. The moment it betrays your principles, demands that you lose your dignity, it becomes as dangerous as fire. Maintaining the rule of reason in situations of fear and desire. This is the concept of Platonic courage. And so, to close this section, I summarized for you the practice of virtues, self-respect, practicing justice, and thinking before acting. In other words, practice, respect, reflect. Basically, this is the summary of these three passages we have studied. 16. But always remember one fact, that death will come to everyone, and that the good things in the world are uncertain. Just as they can be gained, they can also be lost. So, have no doubt. What truly belongs to you cannot be taken away from you. But that which is not yours will be taken from you at some point. Can this be taken from me? Yes, it can. Then it is not truly mine. So I need to have something that is above all of this, because otherwise my conscience cannot find balance. If I'm just, it is very difficult for anyone to take that away from me. If I'm a person of integrity, if I'm fraternal, it is very difficult. That is truly mine. No one can take it away. So I have a solid foundation where my conscience can identify itself and find its place. Otherwise, I am left in a very unstable territory. Today I hold a position, tomorrow I have nothing. Today I'm famous in Hollywood, then you are lost. In 2 years, you are out of fashion. Today I have this or that thing. These things of the world are like that. They obey the geography of the earth. The geography of the earth has peaks and valleys. But there is something within you that is like the sunite, does not waver. And it is there that your consciousness becomes illuminated and finds its foundation. Many times, I also share that story about the doctor. A thanatologist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who worked only with terminally ill patients, and she spoke about this. The more a person possesses true spiritual values, the more lucid they remain, even up to the moment of death. Because if they do not have them, death will pull the rug out from under them. How can consciousness stand without a rug beneath it? It cannot. Then one enters into states of unconsciousness, memory loss, and alienation, because they cannot bear the idea of losing everything they once believed to be real. Or it is in the contrast between life and death that you come to realize what is truly real. What is real? What can you actually take with you, and what can you not? That was not real. Soon it dissipates and scatters in every direction. It is nothing. And if there is nothing that remains in that category of reality, your consciousness loses its foundation. Some time ago, in fact, I did a series here with you as well about the book In Search of Wisdom. The entire series is on YouTube, 15 lectures, by a philosopher from the last century named S.R.I. Ram. There is a passage where he asks, "Have you already built your boat?" Build your boat. Do you know what that means? He says, this here is a boat. Your consciousness is inside it, sailing through the world. But you are going to lose this boat. How will your consciousness continue to navigate? A concept that you have deeply reflected upon. I am certain that it is true. I have lived justice. I know that it is true. I have lived fraternity. I have experienced a feeling of love that is true, that is genuine. A concept that you have deeply reflected upon and experienced is a boat. Your consciousness no longer sinks. It will enter there and sail for eternity. Friends, I think this is incredibly beautiful. And he says, look, if you haven't built your boat, you haven't done anything yet. Your mission is essential to your life. Build your boat. I find this wonderful. And I am also repeating this to you 365 times because Plato used to say that there is reminiscence, who knows? Maybe there is. Endure with patience and without complaint your share, whatever it may be, of the sufferings that destiny, determined by the gods, casts upon human beings. This is very important because Pythagoras' perspective, once again, is identical to the Indian view in this regard. That is, the law of karma cause and effect. It's not because there are gods up there on the clear moon, whimsical, who keep throwing lightning bolts and flowers upon humanity. It is simply cause and effect. And if what happens to a person is cause and effect, it means that it is neither punitive nor vengeful, it is educational. If, in some way, I am selfish and life presents me with a difficult situation, what is life trying to do? It's not that you must pay the price for the selfishness you committed, but rather that you correct it, smooth out the rough edges, and cease to be selfish. Karma is educational, pedagogical. It is not vengeful. It does not seek to punish you. When you understand what it is trying to teach you, you will likely overcome it. We have a tremendous difficulty in understanding this. In fact, be very careful with how this word is used in society. It's my karma. Have you ever seen that? A person is there, going through a difficult situation, making no effort to overcome it, doing absolutely nothing, completely complacent. It's my karma. How is that your karma? No, that's just laziness. That's your complacency. It's like when you're going up the stairs, and someone falls and starts rolling down. Then you just step aside and let them pass. It's her karma. For the love of God. Maybe it is her karma to fall, but it's my karma to be here and have the opportunity to do something. And if I don't act, am I not responsible for that? In other words, do you know why we get so confused about this word? Because that's how we are with one another. Our system, for example, the penal system. A modern prison. Is it educational or vindictive? Do you see what I mean? So, we don't understand the process of reaction as a process that regenerates, but rather as a process that punishes, that inflicts pain. When something wrong happens, people often say, I want justice. Are they really wishing for that person to be regenerated, or do they want to see them crushed? And notice that today, talking about this is almost like a soap opera, because there is a whole group of people who are lovers of hatred. And when you say something like this, people respond, you're defending impunity. Injustice knows how to be firm when it needs to be firm, and gentle when it needs to be gentle. Even Christ, when he had to drive the money changers out of the temple, did so without hesitation or mercy, because otherwise they would not have understood that the temple could not be profaned. If they could have understood with an embrace, he would have given them an embrace. But their language was the whip, so it was the whip, but it was still an act of love. Or do you think he felt hatred toward the money changers in the temple? A being of that level does not harbor hatred, nor does he act out of it. Within, there is always purity, always balance. Outwardly, he does what is necessary. It's like with a child. Another example I often repeat. If a child is about to stick their finger in an electrical outlet, would you just give them a kiss, being overly sentimental? She might die, but at least she'll die loving me. Is that what you would do? True love gives what is necessary for the well-being of the beloved. And sometimes that can be tough, but it never includes hatred. Hatred does not allow for impartiality, nor does it offer the possibility of regeneration. You must have noticed this yourselves. Friends, I've seen this happen many times in life. Someone, for example, makes a mistake. Then someone else goes and tells them about it. Blah, 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 blah. She says, yes, you're right. I'm sorry, you'll do better. Then, in another situation, if the person makes the same mistake, someone else goes and talks to them. It's the same blah, 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 sometimes even the exact same words. And this time, the person gets offended. What are you thinking? I'm what? How can you talk to me like that? You could write the script, the dialogue, for both to say exactly the same thing. One offends, the other does not. Have you ever seen this happen? The same words spoken by people who, deep down, have different intentions. One causes pain, and the other does not. One person feels there is love and genuine concern for them, while the other just wants to get back at them. But the script, the dialogue, can be exactly the same. You could even rehearse the tone of voice so they sound exactly alike. One offends, and the other does not. It all depends on what that person wants for the other, on the feeling that lies behind the words. We are more intuitive than we think. This is something that, if you stop to observe, you will notice we are much more intuitive than we realize. but make an effort to ease your pain as much as possible. In other words, don't fall into that group that says, it's my karma, so I just have to keep suffering. Because that's just how it is. Is suffering good? No. Pain is educational. Let me learn what it wants to teach me, because if I don't, it will mutilate me, and that is of no use to me or anyone else. I'm morbid. I'm masochistic. Let me see what I have to learn from this so I can move on from it. The professor who brought New Acropolis to Brazil, Professor Michel Chanit, had an expression that I often hear: if you got yourself into a mess, get yourself out of it, my friend, and do it quickly. Thank you. Every pipe has two ends. If you went in through the pipe, get out of it quickly. Don't just stay inside, lamenting, I got myself into this mess. Ha ha ha. That's exactly it, get out of the pipe quickly. And then, once you know what a pipe is, you won't go in again. You've learned. In other words, take pain as an educational element and respond to it. Don't settle into it and fall into victimization. Sometimes it's something. In fact, oh my goodness, what a sad historical period we are living in. The most common thing nowadays is to find people talking, each one telling a story of misfortune worse than the other. And I get the impression that they're competing with each other. One says, because I suffered, my father did such and such. Oh, you don't know anything. Let me tell you what happened to me. Laughter. I get the impression that they're competing. Luck, 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 luck. People. The greater the misfortune, the higher the status, because we live in a society of victims. I don't want to hear about anyone's misfortune. That's not the point. Well, see what we have that's best within us. I'm saying that you should never vent to a friend to work through something, but don't make this kind of topic the main theme of your life. Don't try to present yourself as a victim. That's not healthy. It's not healthy to want to be pitied. What would be healthy is if we wanted to be worthy of admiration, of inspiration above all. That people, through us, might become a little better. Wouldn't that be healthy? It's not healthy for us to want to be pitied. There is an old prayer that says, my Lord, my God, have compassion on me. Please, don't let me notice it. I don't like people having compassion for me. Not that you shouldn't have it, but have it discreetly. Seriously, for the love of God. Have compassion, but do it quietly, in secret. That is dignified. Do you see how this word, dignity, carries a wonderful weight and is so strongly connected to the human condition? And remember that fate does not send many misfortunes to good people. Understand this. So, cause and effect. Of course, sowing is free, but the harvest is mandatory. Therefore, you will have a harvest equivalent to what you have sown, to educate you and awaken you. But there will come a certain moment when you will realize that the harvest is. What is necessary to make you grow? And you will come to see that the difficulties in life are not bad. And here it is important to understand this vocabulary, which is universal among ancient philosophies. Good is what makes you grow, which is not necessarily the same as what is pleasant. So sometimes we look back and ask, what was the best moment of my life? The best moment was a difficult one, but it made me grow a lot. At the time, it was not pleasant, but if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be what I am. So there comes a certain point when I no longer see things as misfortunes. Because, notice this well, we are talking about good people, the good ones. They commit themselves to the pain of others. In other words, they tend to experience more pain than someone who is not as good. The better a human being is, the more they commit themselves to humanity. Isn't that so? So they no longer carry only their own pain, but also the pain of many others. Yet, they no longer see pain as a misfortune. Instead, they see it as an opportunity to seek solutions, to search for answers, to grow, and to help others grow as well. It is said that Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, at the age of 15, declared, "I will not rest until I have freed humanity from suffering." Do you realize what it means to make a commitment of that magnitude? And he did not see this as a misfortune. He saw it as an opportunity for growth and for service. Why do good people seem to have so few misfortunes? Because they no longer see things as misfortunes, but rather as opportunities for growth and service. More and more. More and more. Because, of course, a good person will commit themselves to 10 people, someone even better to 100, and will have more challenges, and someone truly exceptional to millions and will face even more challenges. But if they seem to have few misfortunes, it is because they do not see problems as misfortunes, but rather as opportunities for growth and service. Well, continuing on, we are already wrapping up. What people think and say varies greatly. Now something is considered good, and then it is seen as bad. Therefore, do not blindly accept what you hear, nor reject it hastily. Do not expect this is something we mentioned about friends just a moment ago. Do not expect a person to be linear, because they have not yet reached the level to be so far above the earthly geography. So, sometimes someone will say something that is reprehensible, questionable, a certain point, and you have to consider it, analyze it, and subject it to your own principles before deciding whether or not you believe in it. I can always trust so-and-so. You will end up disappointed. But so-and-so is a friend I've known for 30 years. He is always good. Nothing is always the same in the manifested world. The manifested world is a world of one thing and another. In other words, there will never be a situation where you can spare yourself from reflecting, submitting things to your principles, and forming your own judgment. We tend to be complacent. Let me share something with you, which perhaps you already know. Do you know who is the grandmother of laziness? The great matriarch is mental laziness. Then comes psychic laziness, and finally physical laziness, which is actually the most harmless of them all. Not getting out of bed in the morning is something easy to solve. But mental laziness, the kind that doesn't want to think, doesn't want to reflect, wants to buy a ready-made package of concepts from society and just press play, wants to buy the life software and just press play, that one is dreadful. So, I want you to tell me that the verses of Pythagoras are good. Because then I read everything, absorb it, and I don't have the work of judging, analyzing, or establishing my own criteria. That won't work, my friend. You can't just put a quality seal on things and swallow them without chewing. In fact, those quality seals, we've seen recently that they're not always so reliable. Sometimes they're prefabricated. So each situation, you will have to analyze with your own criteria, with your own sense, with your own principles. But he's a friend. He's never let me down. He is a human being. You should not disregard or abandon him. But the elements that life offers you will have to be analyzed one by any single person in different situations, the same situation at different moments, one by one. You will have to pause, reflect, and apply your principles and say, well, this here, yes, that there, no. One of the things I found curious with this professor, Michel Chenique, was that he would give lectures to large audiences and then open the floor for questions. People would ask very similar questions, and he would give completely different answers. He would say, my goodness, sometimes it has more to do with what the person feels. It depends on the intention of the person asking, on the needs of the one asking, and, in fact, on what the person actually said. I find it amusing, because there was a time, throughout my life I was a young woman. I joined New Acropolis when I was 24. I was just a girl. People would ask him things, and he would take on this posture, looking down at the floor, and I was extremely curious to see what he was doing. The person would be speaking, and he would be like that. Then, one day, I decided to ask. When people ask you questions, why do you stand still? Like that, looking at the floor? Are you trying to recall principles, or something like that? He said no, he was trying to empty his mind to truly feel the person. I thought that was incredible. I'm emptying my mind to feel the person. This person asking this question is not like anyone else asking the same thing. Let me feel it. I found this approach fantastic. He is a mature philosopher, nothing exceptional, just a philosopher. But he had the maturity to understand that it depended on the situation, but you can't just use mental laziness. Everyone who asks me this, I'll answer this way. No, I won't. And sometimes the question might be exactly the same, but you can have several different answers. Have you ever seen a homeopathic doctor? You go to his office with the flu, and I go with the flu. We'll leave with 2 different medications. Do you know why? Because he'll ask who your parents are and where you live, and you might think he's being nosy. But he will prescribe medication for a whole human being who is experiencing this symptom.
It's just like that example with Buddha, right? Where you?
I always give the example of Buddha. A man comes and asks, Master, does God exist? No. Another comes and asks, Master, does God exist? Yes. Another comes and asks, Master, does God exist? Maybe. Then Nanda, who was beside him and was his disciple, said, No, Buddha has gone mad. Poor thing. Master, what is this? You're just being contradictory. The others asked the same thing. Yes, but the first one had a spirit of contradiction. Whatever I said, he would think the opposite. The second one trusted me, so I could tell him the truth. And the third was so argumentative that there was no point in saying anything. He needs to search and see for himself. So I answered according to each one. And finally, but if falsehoods are spoken, withdraw gently and arm yourself with patience. In other words, do not align yourself with injustice, do not become its accomplice. This does not mean you should stop and give a moralizing speech or irritate anyone, but simply that you will not take part in something that goes against your principles. Just the fact that you maintain this discreet and subtle stance of not being present in that place, of not feeding into that kind of thing, do you know what will happen? Soon, when you arrive, that subject will no longer be discussed. There are people who are like that. People who, just by entering a room, make everyone sit up straight in their chairs. There are people who, when they walk into the coffee area, the topic changes, doesn't it? Hey, so-and-so, let's change the subject. Let's move on. Hey, so-and-so. And this person has never said, don't talk about that in front of me, nor made any moralistic speech which, in general, when someone does, is not all that trustworthy. But simply because of who they are, because of their presence, because of their integrity, they change the atmosphere. Some people even find it amusing because I've seen this happen before. People are like, let's have a happy hour, let's go to a bar, it's going to be this or that, and then so-and-so arrives, and they try to go around him, they invite him, and then blatantly skip over so-and-so. So-and-so is coming to the happy hour, they're going to ruin the vibe, because we want to talk nonsense, and so. He never said we couldn't talk nonsense, but it just doesn't fit with him. So sometimes people say, if I'm a good person, I'll end up alone. No! You'll be surrounded by good people, or by people when they want to be good, because what I've seen happen is that when someone faces a serious difficulty, when they really need help in life, they don't turn to their happy hour companion, they turn to you. What do you want to be remembered for? We have to choose what we want to be remembered for, what we want to be associated with. And we must stand firm in that, be consistent with it. So, this is our first passage, our first part. You see, it is profound. These are relatively simple things to understand, but profound to live by. We'll have 2 more segments like this. Any questions, any doubts? The golden verses of Pythagoras are very easy to find freely on the internet. You can find them everywhere. I have already reflected on each one of them and found a way to bring this knowledge into our lives. We do not always manage to do that. I hope you have the opportunity. Each week, we will have 3 lectures, and each week, I hope you leave here and reread this little handout, the summary I made, and reflect on how I'll do, in some way, to bring this into your life, to some extent. Because one thing is certain. Pythagoras was not joking. He was sincere and committed to what he said. This is something that leads humanity toward goodness. It is the least we can wish for in our lives, that our lives may be guided toward goodness. That's it, then, everyone. If there are no questions, does anyone have a question? Please, go ahead.
Yes, that's it. In my its style of discourse, which I like so much in Spain, about the isolated thee. Had. Avu, because in my mind, right? I. A destiny determined by the gods.
Yes, because they consider the laws as gods. If you were in India, they wouldn't speak of gods. They would speak of karma, of dharma. But for Greece, the laws are gods. It's not that there is an arbitrary being who wants something for you. But the law of cause and effect, for them, is an arm of God extended over the universe. It is divine. The law is as if it were a being. India, in this sense, makes a bit of a distinction. So it calls law law and gods gods. But for Greece, all the laws of the universe are gods. All of them are gods. There is no arbitrariness. They are divine and fulfill their role. India also has those who arbitrate the laws, who are called lipikas, lipitakas. But it becomes easier for us to understand because the gods are here and the laws are here. In Greece, everything is divine. But it is not the arbitrary choice of an idol god sending down lightning bolts from atop Olympus. In fact, if you stop to analyze, even the etymology of the word shows this. Olympus comes from Olympus, that which emerged from the limbo. In other words, Olympus is something that each of us is meant to conquer. To bring our consciousness out of the limbo, to bring it to the surface, to place the divine at the top of the mountain. So, symbolically, it speaks of the human process. That's it. That was another moment.